My clock says 1 o'clock, so I can go ahead and get us started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session today. Just a reminder, if you've missed any of our past sessions or want to go back and watch the recordings, we've got our YouTube channel. As somebody in our audience asked me right before we got started, oh, I hear the library is moving again. Yes, we are. So the last day open at our temporary location is going to be Monday, November 25th. You can go to our website, apl.org. We've got a whole listing of all the things that are going to happen these next few weeks, like what the due dates are, how to still access library resources, how to still check out things, all the kind of details you need to know are on our website. At this point, we don't have an exact date of when we're reopening. We just have been telling people early 2025. It could be January, could be February, it could be March. We have no clue at this point until Bolt finishes the construction and says, hey, here's the keys. You guys can move in. You're all set. So that's the one downtown by the bus station. So hopefully soon we will have a more exact date for you. At this point, we as staff don't even know when we're moving, other than we're closing and we're going to start the process of getting things all set. Because of course, at the end of the year, Thompson Center is going to be starting to renovate where we are on College Ave to move into. So lots of things happening for both of us over these next few months. So stay tuned for more details. Of course, I'll still be here next month. Maybe next month I'll have more details. I don't know. But of course, you can still access lots of our genealogy resources from home, even when we are closed. The only things that you can't access from home, of course, are Ancestry Library Edition, which you can access at any of the other Wisconsin libraries. So Little Chute, Kimberly, Kaukauna, Neenah, Menasha. Keeping in mind, Menasha is also at a temporary location right now. Well, they do a renovation, but Ancestry Library Edition works at any of those. The only thing that you wouldn't be able to access is the Family Search affiliate library, which Menasha is an affiliate library. So you'd be able to access that affiliate library resources at Menasha or at the Family Search Center that they have over on Park Ridge Ave, but that's open limited hours, of course. Any questions about the moving and all that fun stuff before we dive into today's session on probate records? Yes.
I thought I saw somewhere that there's no session like this in December.
There is no session like this in December because it's the holiday time period. So we always do this session on the 4th Tuesday of the month. Well, that 4th Tuesday of the month in December is Christmas Eve. So I don't plan to work on Christmas Eve, and Thompson Center is not open on Christmas Eve. So unfortunately, you don't get me in December. I mentioned this at the end as well, but we have kind of a tentative plan for next year for this series. So what's going to happen is, of course, we're going to be back in the library, date to be determined. So we don't know if it's going to be January, February, or whenever. But the sessions are going to then be at the library. I just talked to Courtney at Thompson Center here, and we also are going to have a room set up here where you guys would be able to watch me live at the library if you didn't feel like coming down to the library, and or have a volunteer in the room that would help facilitate that Zoom experience for you guys. But the plan right now is I'm kind of revamping the series a little bit. I might reorder some of the sessions or shorten some of them or break them up into two, like the newspaper one got really long, so we might do 2 sessions of newspapers. And I'm going to also sprinkle in some new ones that you guys, if you've attended all year, haven't also been a part of. So like I have a whole hour and a half session all about Family Search, or I have a whole one all about Ancestry Library Edition that I'm going to sprinkle through. I don't have an exact month or anything planned out yet, but hopefully by next month I will have a more tentative plan on what our monthly sessions are going to be and how it's all going to work out. But that's the thought for next year at this point for this series. We will also do virtual. Yep.
But the next one in November is here.
The next one in November is still here. Yep. No December session, and then January to be determined if I'm in the library yet or if I'm here yet, depending on if the library is open or not. But we will always have that virtual component. All right. So now we are diving into probate records. Just a reminder, I am not a lawyer, so I'll do my best to answer some of your questions. Like we had a question right before we started about trust and how that all works. I have no clue. I'm not a lawyer, so I will do my best to try to point you to some resources if I know of them, or tell you, unfortunately, I just don't know. You're gonna have to explore that on your own or talk to a lawyer about how that all works. But we're going to dive into how you use probate, especially in genealogy research. So if you're not familiar with what probate is, it is the legal process for administering an estate. So during this whole probate process, an individual's real estate or their property and their personal estate or their possessions are going to be distributed to his or her heirs, whether or not there's a will. So some people might think, oh, the probate process doesn't happen if there is a will. Well, the probate process happens either way, whether there is a will or whether there is not a will. So some people may use the terms probates and wills interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. So a will is just going to be one document within a probate file, which we'll explore all the kind of contents a probate file might have today. And your will is going to describe what I want to happen with my property and all my possessions and all my assets that I have, who I want to have those things or how I want them divvied up between the people that I want to leave that stuff to. So during that probate process, the court says, okay, this person had a will, but I need to make sure it's actually legal. I need to make sure that they weren't, drunk when they wrote it or, pressured into signing it when they, didn't want to sign it or things like that. So probates and wills are similar, but we'll talk a little bit more about the process for probate, whether there is a will or there is not a will. Because of course, sometimes people die without a will. They don't plan to die, of course, nobody does. So they might not have had a will in place or decided not to have a will. So 2 words that you need to kind of know that are kind of like legalese stuff is going to be testate. So that means that there was a valid last will and testament that existed for that person. So then the probate process, what they do is they verify and authenticate that will and ensure that the person that's named as the executor, which is the person you say, hey, I want this person to carry out all my wishes, all my instructions, they make sure that that person carries out all of the will's directives and doesn't say, oh, instead of you getting 50%, I'm going to only give you 25%. Yes, question.
Who verifies all this?
The court will verify the will.
They have a staff?
They have a whole process. So we're diving into the process of probate and what happens when you have a will or not. But you'll see some of the documentation that the court has to, call a hearing and put out notice that there's going to be a will that's admitted to probate, and you can be there to contest it if you wish to contest it, things like that. The other word that you need to know is intestate. So that means that there is no will that was written, and the court is going to decide how the estate is going to be distributed. So that probate process is in place then to appoint an administrator of this person's estate. They act as that executor and they distribute all the assets according to that state's laws at the time. So before we dive deeper, I just want to point out why you should use probate records, especially in your genealogy research. Of course, I can't counsel you on why you should use them in your personal life, because again, I'm not a lawyer. But what you want to do for genealogy is you want to look at these probate records because they help establish some relationships between family members. So you might get a relationship between spouse and the person who died. You might get the names of the children of all of the, this person who died. You might get siblings listed or nieces and nephews, aunts, uncles, all these people who might be related to this person that they are thinking are going to outlive them. They might list that name and that relationship of that person. You might even get things like the married name of a daughter of your ancestor. So they might say something like, I bequeath to my children, John, Jacob, and Mary, et cetera, et cetera. So you're getting that relationship explicitly listed in that person's will or in the probate records. You can also use probate records as alternative records. So sometimes as we've talked about, there isn't always vital records, or sometimes the relationships aren't as explicit, or things aren't as detailed as you'd like to be in other records that we've looked at up until this point. So you could use a probate record to narrow down a death date or give you a death date if you don't have a death record, for example. Maybe they didn't require death records at that point, but this person still went through the probate process, and you still have that date of death now, even though you don't have a death record. You could also use a probate record to do something like prove a relationship between a parent and a child. So maybe there isn't a birth record for that child because, again, maybe vital records weren't required at that point that child was born, but in that parent's will, maybe they listed their child, and then you can prove that parent-child relationship that way. Probate records could also help you in determining if you have the right ancestor. So of course, as I've mentioned before, we all like to think our ancestors' names are unique, but unfortunately, there's lots of people with those exact same names. So looking at the probate records, you can really determine, okay, is this the right John Smith that I'm looking for? Or is this a different John Smith that happened to live in the same area and died around the same time that my ancestor did? You can also get a lot more context of your ancestors' lives, and that could point you then to some additional records. So you might see what their economic status is based on what things they had in their possession, or you can learn about what property they owned and then follow up with the land records to learn more about their property. Of course, there's religious records. You're going to see a date of death. Well, now, hey, maybe if I know there's not a death record, well, maybe there's a record with the church that I know that they're affiliated with. Or maybe they left some money to the church that they attended because they were, a member there and wanted to, leave money to that church. So now I have that church name. Remember that women even could have probate records too. So unfortunately with our female ancestors, sometimes they don't leave as much of a paper trail as our male ancestors. But depending on the state law that is in existence at that time that female ancestor died, that's going to determine what the rights are of the women at that time and if they were eligible to have a probate record or not. And also she would, of course, probably have to outlive her husband as well. So now I'm going to go through a couple important things that you want to know about probate records before we dive a little bit deeper. So we're going to primarily focus on United States records, of course. So in the United States, probate is going to be regulated by the laws that are at the state level, but they are actually administered at the county level. So you really want to know what county your ancestor died in or what county they owned property in, because that's going to be where their probate is handled, is at the county level. If you just know that they died in the state of Wisconsin, that's not really going to help you. You're going to have to find the county level of where they died. The probate laws, of course, are going to vary state to state. So you want to be sure to understand what the probate laws are in the area that you're researching and at that specific time period, because of course, during different time periods, the law could be different. Originally with probate, only personal property like money and movables, which are property or possessions not including land and buildings, could be bequeathed or left through a will after death. So that's, some of the early probate records, you might see only those things are being passed down to whoever they deem to inherit their materials. It was not until 1540 that the statute of wills first permitted land and other real property to be devised or transferred through a will. So you might see words like bequeathed and devised, little fancier words. So I try to define them a little bit for you there. So just in case you're not familiar with what those terms mean, or you can always do a little Google search, or I'm going to show you a couple of resources in just a minute of where else you can find all these fun legal terms and figure out what they mean in more layman's terms.
Why did they mention 1540 as the statute of wills first permitted land, etc.? We weren't here in 1540. So.
That's a great question. For some reason, I do not know. I'm guessing it was international stuff. That would be the 1540 date.
So that would be
So
outside the United States.
that would be
so
outside the United
Jamestown,
States.
so 1610.
Yes. So some people also use the name will and testament. Sometimes they use that together. Sometimes they say will, sometimes they say testament. So you might have heard those interchangeably. So I just want to say that will usually applies to real property or what they refer to as land, of course. And then testament sometimes is going to refer to that personal property that somebody might have, like different possessions that they might own, like, oh, my tractor, or, things that they own that are not land. Many courts, though, consider those terms kind of equal, and so you might hear them used interchangeably. So if you ever hear them used together, that's what they mean, land and possessions, essentially. Of course, not everybody had a probate. It's not guaranteed. So nearly 10% of all of the pre-1900 adult population in United States made wills. Usually those are going to be the males that have property. If they didn't have property, it's less likely that they had a will because the family just kind of dealt with their possessions then. Before 1900, about 25% of the estates were probated, even though no will had been written. But of course, that percentage is much higher for those who lived in the rural areas because that's where a lot of the landowners are living. So if your ancestor lived in a more rural area or owned land, that's a likely guarantee that they would have probate, but also not 100% true that they would have probate. There are other things in place like different laws, which is why I mentioned knowing what the law is and how that all works. Because sometimes it automatically goes to like the oldest son, for example, or automatically goes to the wife. So again, that's why you always want to look at what the law is in that area at the time that they're dying. Some other reasons why you might not find a probate record for your ancestor, of course, if they didn't own any property or their property was in a different county than what they died in. So that means the probate would have happened in that county to divvy up that land. Maybe they intentionally avoided probate, that was something that people could do, like somebody had mentioned a trust before. So some people use trust to avoid probate. Well, maybe our ancestors also did that as well. Maybe their probate was really delayed. So maybe the probate process didn't happen until their spouse died or when their property needed to be transferred to somebody. So you might see years and years later that the probate process is still happening. You might also have the wrong approximate death or the wrong person that you're looking at. Maybe it's that same name person that you're trying to figure out, oh, I thought this was my ancestor that died on this date. But then once you look, you don't find a probate, but then you find somebody that has the same name on a different death date and you find out, oh, that's actually the one that I wanted to look for. So again, our ancestors don't always have the most common names, or they do have more common names than you think. So you always want to see, even if you find somebody with the same name or even the same middle initial, you want to look at all their probate records just to be sure that you're looking at the right people. The probate process could also take years. So we're going to look at the example of one of my ancestors, and his probate took quite a long time. And I'll show you a little timeline that I did of all of his probate and what happened in the various months and years. Some reasons why the probate process takes so long is minor children. So if they had children under the age of 21 at the time, it doesn't close out until all of those children become of age. Maybe their will was contested. Maybe somebody stepped forward and said, no, this isn't right, or, this is, something that I think is wrong in their will, so they're going to contest it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Maybe they discovered there's some additional property or possessions to be distributed that they didn't know about originally, so they have to kind of reopen that probate process. Maybe the person who was appointed to administer that estate wasn't doing their job properly, so it's going to take a little bit, or maybe that administrator even dies during the probate process and then they have to appoint somebody new. There's all kinds of different things that could happen through the probate process, depending on what the individual circumstances are of that person who's dying. Another little myth that some people, tend to think about when they think about probates or wills is, not every child or every descendant, or sometimes even the widow might be named in the probate. So sometimes they might not just list their specific name, it just might say my wife or my children and not list them all individually, which is always a bummer if you're trying to find those connections and make sure you have all the living children. Or maybe they might list a son-in-law and not the daughter who's married to him. Because of course, at certain times, the women went by their husband's name, Mrs. John Smith, instead of what her real name was. So of course, that makes it a little harder to determine the relationships, because they might just give you a list of who is getting a piece of the pie and not necessarily their relationship. So you have to kind of use as many context clues as you can and use other resources and records as well, along with the probate records. So not all heirs, like I said, might be left something in the will. So something might have happened, like maybe the child was left out for a specific reason. Maybe they were disowned for whatever reason, or maybe they already received their inheritance before their parent died, for example. Maybe, the father knew he was getting sick, so he signed over the land to his oldest son, for example. And then the will might state he already got his inheritance or his, whatever he was getting out of the will. Another thing to keep in mind is the length of the different wills and the probate packets. It's going to be completely dependent on what's going on with your individual ancestor. Some are really short and don't have much in them. Some are very long. So I saw a statistic that said the longest will on record was believed to be 2,216 pages, and that's just the will. Remember, the will is just one piece of the whole probate packet. And then the shortest will was just 4 words, all to my wife. So you never know what you're going to get within the wills or within those probate packets. So I've seen probate packets that are 20 pages. I've seen one that are 200. So you just never know what you're going to get in them. And hopefully you get some good details in whatever amount of pages you have in the probate packets that you locate. One other thing to keep in mind, if you can't locate a probate for a specific ancestor that you're looking for, remember to look at their relatives. So look at their siblings, look at their children, look at the aunts and uncles, especially those are unmarried or childless ones, because your ancestor is likely going to be mentioned in those probate records. So that's how I made a connection between 2 brothers, is I looked at the probate for this married one who didn't have any children. But you can see in his probate, in the will, he lists all of his nieces and nephew who are the children of my ancestor. So now I have that connection between those 2 brothers that I wasn't able to make with other records, or not a strong enough connection, but that helped me solidify that those are brothers, because of course, this person's not going to leave all this stuff to all the named children of my ancestor without a reason. So that tells me that they are brothers. I've got a couple of definitions. So I mentioned a couple other ones earlier, like testate and intestate. But of course, you're going to find all these kinds of fun legalese stuff that you might not know what they are. So I've got a couple listed for you in your handout. But things like administrator or administratrix, that's, when a person dies and they don't have a will, then a person is given authority to administer their estate. If it has the TRIX suffix, that means it's a female administrator of an estate, things like that. Or if you need to know about dower rights, which is when a non-owner spouse has an interest in the land, or what the final account is. So you can look at all these definitions that are in your handout. There's also going to be a lot more resources that you can look at, because of course I can't include every single definition of everything. But we've got this great page on the Family Search Wiki that has all of these probate terms, especially those that are used in the United States, and what they mean. So it's alphabetical, so you can just kind of look through and see, oh, what's a beneficiary? This is what a beneficiary is, or what's common law? This is common law. And then read their quick little definition to learn a little bit more. As we talked about last month with our court records, of course, there's lots of different terms in court records, and probate records are a type of court record. You can always use Google if you come across a term that you're like, I really don't know what that means. Or you can use Black's Law Dictionary like we talked about. There's a website or a book. There's also a really great chapter in this book called The Researcher's Guide to American Genealogy. Chapter 16, it's all related to probate records. And we do have that book available to check out at the library if you'd like to dive a little bit deeper. They've got a lot of legal terminology defined in there as well. So that's another great resource for you. Do you have questions so far before we dive a little deeper into probate records and the types of records you might find within probate records? Is there a law that says you have to go through probate? I do not know. I'm not a lawyer. I'm guessing, you know, if you have some sort of, you know, land or possessions that need to be, you know, something needs to happen with them and you don't have beneficiaries named for certain things, that it would have to go through the probate process. But again, I'm not a lawyer for sure, so I don't know.
Probate is a form for the court to dispense with
Yeah.
all the property that isn't assigned, and you have to pay for it,
Yes.
so there's a cost.
Mhm.
The other section that you were talking about with the property put into a trust, that's free. Because the trust is yours, and that is your trust. The attorney can handle it, or you're appointed assigned person, but it doesn't cost any money after it's created.
Right. So probate process, you do have to pay for. Trust, you do not, it sounds like. So again, check into that for your own, if you want to decide what to do with your own property and things. But for our purposes, we're really focusing on probate records, since those are what we can access within the genealogy stuff. Yeah.
States with $50,000 or more, it's mandatory probate.
If an estate is worth 50,000 or more, it's mandatory. We're not sure about that. So I do not know off the top of my head. Yes.
I found about, in a newspaper article, they had to post about probate coming up.
Yes.
And so finding the notice of a upcoming probate session in the newspaper ads, I found they listed names.
Mhm.
And that's how I found my great aunt's children's names.
Yeah.
Is because they were listed, and it's like, those names didn't mean anything to me, and when I went and looked, it's like, oh, that fills in that gap for her.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the newspaper notices you might find that will help you learn that there's a probate for your ancestor. Yeah. Got any online questions here? Let's see. How early in US history will I begin to find probate records? It depends. So like I mentioned earlier, only a quarter of those pre-1900 people had probate records. So I say I would definitely check. Angie put in a statistic here that said in Wisconsin, probate started in the 1830s. So it really depends on the state and what property or land your ancestor would have owned. Someone said recently I've seen where 30 days after death had to pass before matters could be taken care of. So I don't know that for sure. I'm not sure how much time has to pass. And again, I think it depends on the different state laws, depending on where that person died and the time period. Because of course, the state laws in 1930 are going to be different than the state laws today or the state laws in 1830. So you need to know what time period and where your ancestor died and figure out the law at that time. Where at the courthouse do I look for records if I can't find online? So it's going to depend on what they call those courts that handle probate at the that level. So we're talking a little bit about how you can look in the Family Search Wiki to see how you can find stuff offline. Someone said they had to wait 6 months to settle a will. So again, time frames can vary. So. All right, so now we're going to go through the different steps in the probate process. So of course the steps are going to vary just a little bit depending on if there was a will or if there is not a will. So remember, if we say testate, that means there is a will. If we say intestate, that means there is not a will. The steps are also going to vary slightly depending on the time and the place. So again, you need to know the time and the place and what the laws are. And then of course the various circumstances that affect our ancestors' lives. You know, did they own land? Did they own more than one piece of land? How many possessions did they have? How many kids did they have? Did they have a lot of debt that they had to sell off possessions and land in order to pay all their debts? All these various circumstances are going to be individual to your own ancestors. So it's all going to vary depending on that individual's life and what they have for their property and possessions. So essentially all the records related to a person's probate are going to be kept in what they call the probate file or a probate packet. So these are all essentially loose papers that are almost never in order. And the steps that are taken during the probate process, I kind of lay them out for you. But as you look at the probate packet, you might see like what's called the final accounting, which happens towards the end of probate. That might be at the very top, and you might not have it all necessarily in order where it's like the person's will and then they petition the court and all this stuff. So realize when you get that packet, it's all just a bunch of loose papers. And I'll show you what I did when I look at my ancestors' probate and how I create a little timeline and make it all make sense for me. So first, we're going to talk about how to handle probate when there is a will. So of course, that person who is going to eventually die decides, I'm going to write a will. I say that I'm of sound mind, I'm of legal age, and I'm not under undue influences. Again, that will is that legal document that describes how you would like your property and all of your assets distributed after your death. So within that will, you name an executor of your will who carries out your wishes. And again, like we mentioned a little bit ago, in that probate process, that executor, carries out your wishes. But actually in the probate process, that person that you named, they could even decline to accept being the executor of your estate. Maybe that person even died before you did, because there might be, a significant amount of time between you writing that will and you dying. 5 years could pass, 10 years, 20, 30. We don't know, of course, when we're going to die when we write that will. So lots of things can happen. Either that person could die, or they could say, you know what, I don't want to, be the executor for whatever reason. Then the court has to appoint somebody to be an administrator of that will. There's also something called an unsolemn will, where they don't name an executor. So then again, the court has to appoint somebody who's going to carry out your wishes for you. In addition to, of course, you writing your will and filing it many years before you die, there might be also multiple versions of will, and each new one kind of supersedes the previous one. So sometimes in that probate process, you might see when they're kind of trying to determine if a will is valid or not, is this the last known one? Or is there one that he wrote 5 years later? Or maybe somebody comes forward and tries to contest it with a previous will that they had submitted prior to the one that they consider the legal will. So again, all kinds of crazy things can happen in the whole probate process. So I've got an example of a will here for one of my ancestors who died in 1871. And you can see on his will that he dated this in 1868. So just a few years before he died. So you can see, if you look at it, he's professing to be of sound mind. And he's saying, this is my last will and testament. This is what I say. I'm appointing this person and my son-in-law to be the executor of my will. These are all my wishes, so I direct them to deed to my son. All of these things, I deed this to my wife, etc., etc. All the land that he's got listed here, all of his possessions, clothing, etc., etc. He goes on and on for a few pages about all of his wishes because he's listing out his children and what things he wants his children to have. And then if we go to the second page, you can see over here, this is when he dates it and signs it. And then they've got witnesses that are saying, yep, I saw him write this out and date it and sign it. So then in the probate process, these witnesses, if they're still alive, are going to become important in the probate because they need to say, yes, I can confirm that I was there at this date, at this time, and I saw this person sign it, and then they were of sound mind and all that fun stuff. So proving that this will is now valid. So sometimes later, you might also see down below there have proof of will. And so you can see in April of 1871, this is part of the probate process where they went through and confirmed that this was his valid will. And that's what they used when they divvied up all of his land and property. So you might get it right after the will, or it might be part of the loose packet that is the probate packet. I've got a second will for you. So sometimes, especially in later years, they kind of gave you like a pre-filled form where they had some of the things written out, and then you'd kind of fill in the blanks a little bit. So this is an example of one where they filed it in October of 1924, and the person didn't die until October 1930. But if we go here, it's on Family Search. It's just a one-page will where he's kind of just filling in the blanks here. So if we zoom in, it's saying he's sound mind and memory. He publishes and declares this his last will and testament. So he gives to his wife personal property such as cows, horses, all the farm stuff, the land, etc., etc. He names all of his children, and if the children at the time are married, he lists their married name, which is great. So now I've got those relationships established right away in his will. And then if we scroll down, we see this person is appointed as his executor, and he signs it on this date, and he's got the witnesses here as well. So just like the other one. So of course, yes, question. So when the will is filed, that means they like bring it to the courthouse, and the court people like write it down. So remember last month when we looked at all the different court records, they have like minute books where they record so-and-so brought their will on this date, and it's recorded in such and such volume or such and such page or file. So they, in order to make their will legal, they need to bring it to the court and have it filed with the court before they die. Yeah, so if they didn't bring it to the court and file it with the court, I'm not sure what the process is. I would guess that they would have to, work a little bit harder to prove that this is for sure a legal will of that person. I mean, if they had witnesses sign it and stuff, if those witnesses are still alive, I'm assuming they would call them at the hearing when they're trying to determine if this will is valid or not, and see if they're able to determine that it is for sure a valid will or not. Yeah. So of course, like I said, some time might pass between somebody writing out their will and filing it and them dying. Sometimes it might be a few months, might be a few days, might be many, many years. But after the person dies, that executor who was named in that will, or some other interested party like a spouse or children, somebody who has an interest in this person's death and is owed something essentially, might file a petition to start the whole probate process. So the court is going to admit that will that was presented to probate, and they set a specific time on a specific date for a hearing where they are going to, read out that will, and they publish some sort of notice in the newspaper usually that says, hey, this will is going to be presented in probate. If you, want to come and listen to the will being read, and if there's anything to contest, or if you have, something to say about this will being valid or not valid, this is your time to come forth. At the same time, they also publish a notice to any creditors. So if your ancestor died and owed money to people, they, now have a chance to come forth and say, hey, he owed me $300. I've got this promissory note that he signed 2 years ago saying he was going to pay $300, and I haven't had my money yet, and now he's dead. So I need that $300 from his estate. So anybody who is owed money gives that opportunity to come forth to the court and say, hey, I need my money back. More things might happen between the time the will goes before the judge to be proven and, you know, when the whole probate process starts. So things might happen like maybe they have to appoint a guardian ad litem for those who have an interest in the case, but are not able to represent themselves. So perhaps like minor children, you know, if a child's only 14 and the dad dies and the mom's still living, well, the mother, you know, could represent them, but she also has an interest in the dad's, you know, land and possessions. So what they do is they appoint a guardian ad litem to advocate for that 14-year-old child because the parent also has an interest in what piece of the pie that child would get, of course. Multiple things could also happen on the same date. So you might see 4 or 5 things happening if you go through all the papers in the probate packet and see, well, everything's happening on November 13th, you know, because there might be 4 or 5 things that are happening. This notice to creditors gets sent. This notice of the hearing gets published. The guardian ad litem gets appointed. All this stuff might happen on the same date. And then things might not happen for a couple weeks until a hearing happens, or you know, there's some sort of time period between them publishing these notices and the hearings actually happening, because they've got to have enough time to allow those people to kind of get their proof, like, hey, I'm owed money. I have to have time to get to the courthouse and show them or get my proof together before the hearing happens. So there might be multiple weeks or months that, you know, might, you know, be before they're allowed to kind of show their proof to the court. So here's an example of what it looks like when you petition the court to prove that will. So as we saw earlier, Richard died in October 1930. So then by November 13th, the people that have an interest in his estate being settled, which was his wife, decides to file this petition. So she's petitioning. You can see her name, where she is living, showing her husband died on the 21st of October, that he had a last will and testament. This person was named as the executor and he resigned as being the executor. So she's filing that petition saying, we need to get this probate process rolling. Here's all of his heirs. So listing the children, listing herself as the widow, of course, saying who's over 21, who's under 21. So of course, those under 21 are getting that guardian ad litem. She's saying what she estimates the value of the estate to be and the value of their property, or what you know, they have left in like their money. And then, you know, saying to the court, like, let's get this rolling, and signing it. So that's kind of the start of the probate process, is them giving a petition to start making it so that they, you know, set a court date that is going to determine when this will is officially read before the court. So the judge then publishes this notice to prove the will and this notice to creditors. So he's saying we need to publish this specific notice, saying that this person died on this specific date. This is when our hearing is going to happen, on the first Tuesday of May, 1931, et cetera, et cetera. So you might have just a little something that the court or the judge is signing. So again, it happens on the same date as that petition happened, because the court says, I need to publish this. Then you might get something like this publisher's affidavit, where they've got a little clipping of the actual newspaper notice, where they're publishing that notice to prove the will, and the notice to the creditors saying, hey, this person died. Here's the date where we're going to listen to any people that are owed money, or any people who might want to contest the will. This is the date and time you got to show up and let us know. And they publish this for a few weeks in a local newspaper. And so this is just the publisher saying, yep, I for sure did that. These are the dates I did it on. This is how much it cost me. And then the estate has to pay for that cost of having it published. Yes.
Is that still done through newspapers now that everybody subscribes to it?
I do not know if that's still done through newspapers. I believe it is. Yeah. So as you can see, it starts on November 13th, the same kind of time period that everything else starts. They publish it for 3 weeks until November 27th. Then, of course, at that specific date and time that the judge set, that will is then presented to probate before the proper judicial authority, so usually a judge. So they go through the whole process of trying to figure out, is this a real and valid will of this person? So if no one comes forward to contest the will, it's proved in court and certifies it as valid. And then the judge issues a certificate issuing that this will has been proven as valid. If someone comes forward and contests it, there's going to be a different procedure depending on the state law at the time. But usually a lawsuit is filed and they name the executor as the defendant. And there might be some additional hearings, of course, additional paperwork in that probate packet discussing why the will was contested or what happened with that case and what bearing it had on this person's probate. If the will is proven as valid, then the court is issuing what's called the letters testamentary to the executor of the will. So this basically says you have the legal authority to proceed with administering the probate. So do what you need to do, settle up those debts, and we'll meet back here again. So here is an example of that certificate of the proof of the will. So again, that judge has had the hearing on such and such date. People have presented the will and he says, yep, I talked to all the witnesses. I know it's valid. Nobody came to contest it and say this isn't a valid will. So I say it is valid. And then he's again issuing this letters testamentary to the executor, who is going to be his wife, and saying she has the legal authority now to proceed with the probate process and move forward in the whole process. So sometimes you don't get a whole lot of details in these. It's just, them showing we're following the proper legal steps and they're signing it or the judge is signing it, things like that. But sometimes in the other little pieces like we've looked at, you might get those names of the children, like we looked at in the wills and things like that. So now that will is administered to probate, they pay a recording fee, and that will is officially recorded or registered with the court. Before photocopying was made available, this meant that original handwritten will from your ancestor was filed in court in that probate packet, along with all the other papers that are related to this person's probate case. So now that person who is named the executor is going to post a bond. That bond amount is going to vary depending on the estate's value. And then they proceed to pay all the obligations. So if that person who died owed money, they pay the money based off, what money that person had, or, maybe that person, needed to sell off some real estate or possessions in order to make the money to pay the creditors. So during this process, also, they take an inventory and they take an appraisal of all of the things that person would have left to see how much everything's owed. And then, of course, if there's any creditors, as they are, paid off and given their money, they are going to sign receipts that are then kept in that probate packet showing that person's been paid. So you'll find things like those receipts in those probate packets. Again, like I said, the estate might have had to sell property or other possessions to fulfill all of those repayments of debt. So you might see some additional paperwork like that. Like if they were legally required to sell the land, for example, you would see the paperwork telling them that they had to sell the land, for example. Or sometimes people will have like an estate sale, something like that, where they sell off the possessions in order to make that money to pay off the creditors. Again, everybody's probate is going to be different. So here's an example of that bond that Mary had to pay in order to be the executor. It's kind of just saying, I'm going to do my job. I'm going to probate this will properly. And if I don't, then I'm on the hook for some money. So that's kind of how they make sure that people are doing their job and not taking all the money from the estate and running off. So it's cool if this is the person that is related. You can see Mary signs this. So you can see her signature throughout this whole probate packet because she's the executor. So as my second great grandmother, that's awesome to have lots of papers with her signature on it. Here's a sample of the inventory. So you can see they're listing out the land and what the value of the land is. And if we go into the probate packet, you can see it's actually multiple pages. So right here, they list the real estate, including the legal description of the land, which we'll talk all about land records next month. So you have to hold on to learn a little bit more about land records. But it's talking about the land that he owes. So he actually owns 2 different pieces of land at the time that he died, and this is the value of them. Then if we go to the second page, this is where they're listing out all of his other properties. So you can see he's got some sort of interest in all of these little farm equipments because he's a farmer. He's got all these different things like wagons and milk wagon and walking plows and an automobile and a truck and all horses and cows and calves and all this kind of great stuff. And you can see all the kind of cool things that he had. Like, wow, he had 50 chickens at the time he died. And this is what they are, estimating the value of those at the time. So you might have a few pages of some of the things that your ancestor owns. And then, of course, the appraisal people are signing it at the end and saying this is all of the things that we listed in their inventory and what their value is. So that's a great way to figure out what kind of economic status your ancestor was based on all the things that they might have had. And then, like I said, you might get some receipts like this. This is showing that Julius Gardebrick, who was his brother, who was owed $450, was paid. So over here we can see it's paid, and Mary, as the executor, is signing off on this receipt to make sure that he got paid. So now everything that has been paid is everything that's been due to people or owed to people is paid. Now the executor is going to file another petition saying, hey, I'm ready to give the final account. Everything's been paid. Let's close out this probate process. So again, the judge orders an order for notice of final settlement. So again, notices are printed in the newspaper, naming that date that final settlement is going to be heard in the court. The executor then comes before the court and gives their final account saying, okay, here's what I paid, and showing proof I paid all this stuff to all these people. And then the court is going to issue that notice of final settlement that closes the probate process. And now after all those debts are paid, now the court has given approval to carry out the rest of the will. So if anything is left after everything's been paid, now whatever gets left to the wife or whatever gets left to the kids, now all that stuff can be distributed if it still is available to them. So for example, if they had to sell off the land in order to pay the debts, well, the land that was supposed to be left to the son or whatever, now it might not be available to be left to him because they had to pay off the debts in order to close out the probate. So here is an example of that petition and the account. So again, Mary is filing this as the executor saying, hey, I'm ready to give my final account. So it's just, again, kind of a really blanket kind of legal statement saying, hey, I'm ready. I've, done all the things I need to do. I'm signing it. And the court is saying, yep, we recognize that you're signing it and we will set a date. So now she's giving the final account. So similar to how you see the inventory, now she is giving a final account of all of the things she did. So she is listing out the debt on this side, and then she's going to list down here any money that came in or any expenses that she had through the whole process. So she had to pay insurance, or she had to pay for certified copies, or pay a guardian ad litem to represent her kids, or pay an attorney. So she's listing out all these costs of her being the executor and what she had to pay. And so that might continue on a few pages. And again, she is saying, here's the people I paid off that said they were owed money, or here are the funeral expenses up here. Like I paid $127 to the undertaker to bury this person who died, because of course that's not free. And then again, she's filing that with the court. And then again, after the judge looks at that and hears the final settlement, he issues this order for final order for notice of final settlement saying, okay, this is the date when we're going to hear the final settlement. That's kind of the last opportunity for anybody else to come forth and say anything. So you can see, remember, Richard dies in October of 1930. The final settlement isn't happening until the 3rd of May of 1935. So you can see this probate process took almost 5 years because of all the things that they had to do in order to pay off all the debts. They had to sell some of their land in order to pay the debt. So you'll see that kind of throughout these pages in the probate process. But this is the judge saying this is when we're going to hear this final statement of this probate process. I'm going to make a weekly notice in the newspaper, in the Oconto County Reporter, on such and such date. So everybody gets that notice that this court is going to hear the probate settlement for this case. And then again, you get that publisher's affidavit with the little clipping that they posted in the newspaper saying, yep, we ran it for 3 weeks from April 18th to the 2nd of May, saying, again, this is the date that this probate is being finalized. And then, like I said, at the court date, then the judge hears all the stuff and issues this order closing the probate. So you can see this is who the judge was on this such and such date. He's listing all the people who have an interest in it or who had a guardian ad litem and how they were represented, listing all the costs and things, talking about the land, et cetera, et cetera. Again, talking about, more things like who's owed what or who has an interest in all of these things. And then on the last page, he's signing and saying, yep, she is discharged now from her duties. The probate is settled officially on May 21st of 1935. So I see there are a couple questions here in the chat. So let's see. So someone says you can sometimes tell from an inventory what a person's occupation might have been. Yes. So she said one ancestor's inventory showed a lot of blacksmith tools. We hadn't known before that he might have been a blacksmith. So yeah, sometimes even like people who were farmers, that might have been their main occupation, but then they also did blacksmith on the side. So you might see some things like that. Someone says, are all wills of deceased persons considered public records after probate process has been complete? That's going to be determined by the state laws. I believe they are public records, but again, you'd have to determine with the individual state. See if there's another question here. Am I correct that in the past probate was entered before debts were paid? The notice was put in the paper, then debts were paid. We just found out that here in Tennessee, for small estates, debts must be paid before the estate can be probated, which surprised me. So again, it depends on the different states, the different time periods. So that might have been the law at the time that that person died. Maybe that's how they handled it then. So again, it's going to all vary depending on time and place and all the different state laws. Any of you guys have any questions before we talk about how to handle it, or a couple more details before we dive into how to handle it without a will? Yes.
Can't distribute the assets to the ancestors until this is all done.
So again, it depends on the state law. But for this example, for this Wisconsin probate, they, had to pay off all the debts before, the rest was given to the kids and the wife.
But he wound up with $1,000, $10,000. He couldn't give it to the whoever he wanted to until the probate.
Until all the debts were paid, until probate process closed. Yep. So again, depending on your ancestor specific situation, you might find some other papers in their probate packet. Again, everybody's situation is going to be unique. So what I did to kind of help make sense of probate and what happens in probate is I made a timeline of what's going on and writing out a summary on what each paper is showing. In a little bit, I'm going to show you something on Family Search. So if you find your ancestor's probate record on Family Search, they have a new feature that is artificial intelligence, which will kind of give you this little artificial intelligence summary of what the paper is saying. So it kind of helps you understand, okay, what does this paper mean? Or what is this legal definition? Or you can look through like Google searching, like, what is this letter's testamentary and what does it mean? Or look in the law dictionary, like I mentioned, the Black's Law Dictionary, to kind of try to figure out and piece together things. So what I did, for example, is I did a little outline. So like I mentioned, the probate packet is not in order. So what I did is I just opened up a Word document on my computer. I took the first page, I wrote down what the date was and what happened. So then I put it all in order of how the probate packet should be, but you can see, I know it's kind of small, but like I put in parentheses what page it was in the probate packet. So for example, Richard Garterbrick, who's my second great grandfather, his probate packet was 111 pages total. You can see what page his will is on. You can see when he dies. You can see all the things happening on this November 13th date, like that petition, the order, naming the executor, all the kinds of things that are happening. And again, I'm listing all the different dates and just a little brief description, like on the 9th of December, 1930, that's when they issued the certificate that proved the will. And I can find that piece of paper or those 2 pieces of paper that say that on such and such page. So that's what I did to kind of help me make sense of what happened and why this probate process took so long, because again, he dies October 1930. The probate isn't finalized until May 1935. And even there's actually another additional letter in his probate packet from January of 1939. That's from the National Farm Loan Association, just inquiring and saying, hey, did this probate officially get finalized? Because Mary's now looking for take out a mortgage on a new property, and I need to make sure that all of the debts of her husband were settled before I'm going to issue her this mortgage. So you might still get additional things like that, these companies following up and making sure she's all good legally before they move forward with issuing her things. So again, you can see all the different fun things that I found in this probate packet and how it really helped me understand the whole process of how probate worked for this specific individual. So again, probate packets, they might be 20 pages, they might be 100 pages, they might be 150 or 250. You never know. It's going to depend on each individual person. So for example, some other things that I found in his probate packet was this whole testimony from one of the hearings that they did, where they were having to pay or to sell his real estate. So what they did was they had Mary come up to the stand and say, okay, your name is Mary, you're the widow. He left you 8 children, and then she's listing out all the children, all their names, who they're married to, et cetera, where they're living. So I'm getting all this great detail about the family because she's providing this expert eyewitness testimony that I'm now getting in his probate packet. So you might get lucky and have your ancestor be, called to the stand and have to testify on something and provide lots of great genealogical details. Any more questions before we talk about what the process was like without a will? Yeah.
Well, getting back to the familysearch.org, which it looks like that's where you found these. So
That one, yes.
is that proprietary information, or is that the only way to access these records is through familysearch.org?
Nope. So I'm going to show you some of the other places where you can access these probate records.
Okay.
But Family Search is one of the great spots to find them. Yeah. Any other questions before we move on? Are the papers concerning the contesting of a will found in a probate package, or are they separate in court records? So they should have some copies in the probate record, but you also would want to follow up with the actual court record, because like I said, like that executor gets named as the person in that court case, just to be sure that you have all of the different papers that might be in that contesting of the will. I would always double check because you just never know. What's really great about sometimes finding the ones that are digitized online is they even scan the backs of the pages. So you can see, even if it's just a little stamp from the court saying such and such paper was filed on this date, you at least have that little stamp. Or sometimes they wrote like little notes on the back of the papers that, you know, they're scanning the backs of those papers too, just in case there's other little notations for you. Yeah, someone said they're ordering probate packets from Indiana that cost $75 each. So sometimes, yeah, if you can't find them online, you have to order them or go do your research on site. So every state's going to be different on how you can access things. And I'm going to show you the easy way to access them online and then what to do if you can't find them online. Yes, I am going to talk about the new full text search for probate records in Family Search in just a minute. All right, so just quickly, we're going to talk about how steps kind of vary a little bit when you don't have a will. Again, it might vary slightly depending on the time and the place that the probate occurs. But essentially, just like somebody would if they had a will, they have to petition the court. So again, it's usually a person who wants to administer this person's probate because they have some sort of interest. Like, I'm the widow, or I'm the brother, or the child of this person who died, and I'm owed a piece of that pie. So I want to get this process started so I can get what my piece of the pie is. So it's usually somebody who's related to that person or has some sort of vested interest. Just like before, a hearing is held. That person is then granted the rights to administer this probate, or they're denied, and then, you know, they have to find somebody else to administer it. They have to post a bond just like the executor would if there is a will. They again post that notice to those creditors and debtors. They again do that inventory and appraisal. They might have to do some sale or distributing of some of the property if they are owed, you know, if they have more debts than what they have available to pay off. Then, of course, all the various records might be kept, like different reports to the probate courts, or sometimes they have annual settlements where this person who is administering it has to prove what they've done within the quarter or some sort of annual time period of how they're settling the estate. At the end, after they've settled everything, they have that final settlement that they file. And then again, they distribute everything to anybody who's owed anything or anybody who, you know, legally is given something, like a child, if there's anything left over. And then again, there's those receipts that you might get from those creditors or those people who were given a piece of that estate. So like a child was given their $500 portion, they're going to sign a receipt saying, yep, I've been paid in full my portion of the estate. And again, that only happens if they actually had money left over. So similar, this is going to be what they're issued. So this is what's called the letters of administration. So this is the document that grants authority to this person to handle the estate. So it's very similar to that letters testamentary that other person, the executor, would have got if there was a will. So this is essentially when there's not a will, they get this letter of administration to say, yep, you have the legal authority to proceed. So similar, it just lists the person who died, who the person that's going to be administering it, what their property is, that they didn't leave a will, if they have any surviving, you know, spouse or children or things like that, what their property is, or people who have interest in what their estate is. They, of course, have a hearing sometimes on, you know, being appointed this administrator, because, you know, maybe there might be more than one person who wants to be appointed, or we have to make sure there's no will for sure that's being hidden from us. And this person has to testify that, yep, I knew this person, or this is how I'm related, la-di-da-di-da. So again, you get some sort of testimony in here from this person. And then again, they order that appointment of that person to be administered, and then they pay that bond saying, yep, I'm going to do my job, or I'm on the hook for paying this amount of money. And again, that bond is dependent on the value of that person's estate. So here they're signing that, and the judge is signing that. And then, like I said, you might find some different records, depending on the various circumstances, you know, whether there is a will or not a will. But you might get some documentation of how they distributed different assets. So for example, you might see receipts for money that was received or property that was sold. You might get a list of who bought stuff at an estate sale, if they had to have an estate sale to make money to pay off the debts, or if they just sold everything in order to give the money to whoever was owed money. You might get some petitions for guardianship of children if they're minors, or like I mentioned earlier, the guardian ad litem. So that child, you know, maybe they still have a surviving parent, but that parent also has an interest in the estate. So then the court appoints a separate person to be representative for that minor child to make sure their interests are, you know, taken into account in this whole process. You, of course, might get the list of heirs and their relationships to the deceased. And then you might get a decree of distribution. So this is something that the executor is going to complete to show how they distributed all the things to the beneficiaries and how that was completed. Just showing, you know, such and such got this amount of money, such and such got that amount of money, et cetera, et cetera. So other things you might see, depending on the situation. So this is an example of what's called a petition to determine descent of lands. So this is in one of my ancestors' probate packets. So Jacob dies intestate. So again, he dies without a will. And they need to determine who all of his legal heirs are and their interest in the amount of land that he owed or that he owned. So they're writing out his land, the legal description, they're writing out his widow and all of the children who might have an interest in this. And then they need to determine, okay, how we're going to divide this up between his wife and all of his kids. Yes.
Someone dies without a will.
Mhm.
And no one comes forward that wants to be created, so the court appoints a lawyer. Will we find that, will it state anywhere that the court appointed a lawyer that's administrative, so we know it's not a relative?
So you'd see the name of the person, you'd have to like see, is that somebody that they knew or is that somebody who's a lawyer? Like you could use city directories in that case to figure out, okay, who is this person? Like I've never seen this name before. Like even looking back to the will where Richard said, oh, I want this O.H. Zahn to be my executor. Well, I had no clue who that guy was. It wasn't somebody who was related that I knew of. So you can go look up that person and see, oh, was it a neighbor or a friend or like a business associate or, you know, who that person was. Because it isn't always a family. I mean, that's kind of the number one. Usually it is a family member or somebody who has some sort of vested interest, but it might be somebody who is, you know, kind of an outside person. Who that was just what they had available, or you know, maybe nobody came forward and they had to appoint somebody. So just quickly, I wanted to point out too, like even though it's awesome to find stuff online, the scanned versions are usually in black and white. So this is the scanned version that I found on Family Search on the right here. But on the left here, you know, before this got online, I went to the UW Green Bay archives where they have Oconto County probate records for my ancestor who died in Oconto County. And you can see it's a lot more detailed and beautiful in color, and it's original in color. And you can see like this little stamp a lot better than you can in the black and white version. So if you're having difficulty making out certain like words or things like what this says, maybe follow up and try to get it offline. And so you can see that original paperwork. And it's always cool to be like, okay, my ancestor like actually held this piece of paper. Like that's cool that I'm holding it now 100 years later. Yes.
The place that I lived just a year and a half ago down near Milwaukee, after they digitized everything, they discarded the originals.
Oh.
So is that happening a lot?
It depends on the different repositories. So some places might, after they scan it, discard it. Some places, you know, even though they scan it, they might still keep the originals. It really depends. I mean, obviously at some point, some of these repositories are going to run out of space. So like we talked about last month, sometimes they don't always keep all of the court case files. It is a possibility. So at least we would have the digital version. That's better than nothing. I thought I saw a question up here. Let's see. Was there an estate sale if there was enough money available to pay off debt? So usually they did an estate sale for various reasons. So it might be just because nobody wanted their stuff or they needed to pay off those debts. So again, it's going to depend on your ancestors' individual circumstances. How would you go about money value for stock issued in 1950s? So there are some websites where you can convert $1950 to today or $1900 to today. Just Google money conversion, such and such period, and you should be able to find out what the value is in today's terms. Let's see. Yeah, and that might be a good question for a lawyer too. All right, so just quickly, I want to talk about a little bit of the information you might find within those probate packets. So of course, no guarantee you're going to find any or all of this stuff in the probate packets, because again, you know, everybody's probate packet is going to be different depending on their individual circumstances and the amount of detail they decide to put in their records. But you usually would get a death date of that person who's dying, whose probate this is. Sometimes you might even get a death date of a family member, like their spouse. Or it might help you narrow down that death date of their spouse or that husband that predeceased them. So it might list like, you know, maybe in the probate process for the husband, the wife dies, and then they have to, you know, include information in there about how the wife died or when she died. Of course, those relationships or those heirs of that person who's dying, they might include the name and the places of residence, or at least like the city and state of where they're living. So they might list their children or sometimes even the grandchildren, like if one of their children predeceased them, they might be then taking that child's interest and dividing it among their grandchildren. So say they had a daughter who died and she had 3 kids, instead of the daughter getting that part of her inheritance because she's already dead, they're going to divide her inheritance by 3 for her kids, who would be the grandchildren of that person who died. You might, of course, get some names of their associates or friends. It might include things like the appraisers, the different creditors and debtors. So it's kind of cool when you can see like, oh, he shopped at this store and this is what he bought at the store. And at a certain time, they bought stuff on credit, so they didn't have to pay for things before they got it. But you can see all the things that he bought at the farm equipment store or whatever. You can just see the different bondsmen, the different administrator, the different people who are buying things at estate sales. And again, you know, look up those people and see, are they neighbors? Are they friends? Are they business associates? Are they related somehow, even distantly? You know, it could be the wife's family that's buying some of the stuff from the estate sale or something like that. You can, of course, like we mentioned, sometimes figure out their occupation, either explicitly listed in the thing, or just by looking at all of their things they have in the inventory of, wow, he's got a lot of farming equipment. Well, it's because he was a farmer. Again, you can figure out that economic status based on kind of the amount of things that they had, the value of things, and then use an online converter of, okay, what's $100 in 1930 compared to $100 today? Like, what's the value of that $100 from 100 years ago? Sometimes you get medical information about that person. Of course, that original signature of your ancestor, if there was a signed original will and they didn't just sign with an X. Usually, of course, if they signed with an X, that usually means that they were illiterate, or maybe they were so feeble at the time that they were writing their will because they were close to dying that they just didn't have the ability to sign their own name. And then, of course, if they had minor children, you get some approximate ages. Like we looked at the example earlier where it said, you know, who was under 21, and it listed their ages of those minor children, because they consider a minor to be under 21 at the time that 1930 probate was written. So I saw there were a couple things popping up here before we dive into how to locate these. How do I find company website? Think they went out of business. What do you mean? Like, why would you want to find a company website? Let's see. So there's something called the Wayback Machine through Internet Archive. So you can see if you can look in the Wayback Machine and find that old website. Otherwise, newspapers are awesome. You can find out more information sometimes about a company, even if it's long out of business, through the newspaper. Why would medical information be included? So sometimes, maybe if they're contesting the will, they might write that this person had, mental incapacities or something like that. Or they might describe, things that they went through before their death, or you might see, oh, they had to pay the doctor for such and such operation, or things like that. So sometimes you have to read through between the lines a little bit, or you don't get like a ton of medical information, but it might be just a little bit to give you a hint on what's happening with that person. Any questions in here before we move on to how to locate these? Yes. Yes. Outagamie County is also at UW Green Bay, up to a certain time period. So I'll show you an example on the UW Oshkosh website. So for Wisconsin, we have something called area research centers that are all throughout the state at the various UW colleges. So essentially, all of the counties that are around that UW college is going to have historic records for that area. So for example, UW Green Bay has Oconto County, Outagamie County, Shawano County, Brown County, Door County, and a couple other counties. So there's a map on the Wisconsin Historical Society website where you can see what county is linked to what of the UW schools. Yeah. And then if you look at that university's website, it'll tell you specifically dates and locations. All right, so how to locate these? Well, each state, of course, like I mentioned, the state kind of handles probate, but then it's handled at the county level. So the probate courts might have had various names, and the states might have had non-county probate jurisdictions. So in order to figure out, okay, where's probate and what's the court called for the different locations that I'm searching in, I'm going to look at the Family Search Wiki. So for example, you might want to search, okay, Arizona probate records, and then I see, oh, it falls under Superior Court. Or, oh, I search Wisconsin probate records, and I see it falls under the Circuit Court. So there's going to be various named courts. Some might have a specific probate court. So again, you just go to the Family Search Wiki, you would search that state or that country even. If you're looking like, hey, I want to find German probate records, you can do that here as well. So like I said, you can type in Arizona probate, and you can see one of the options here, Arizona probate records. And now it's going to bring me to a whole page. It's going to link me to some online resources that they might have, either on Ancestry or Family Search or somewhere else. It's going to tell me a little bit of history sometimes, or if they're available or if they're not, how to search for them, et cetera, et cetera. So I can kind of do this for each individual state and see what online resources there are. Or like I said, you could even search, I can search Germany probate. And, like I said, we're kind of focusing only on United States ones, but of course there's international probate records as well. So I can read all about how they handle probate records in Germany, what types of records they might have, and see some online collections that they might have as well. So this is kind of my place I would start to figure out, is there stuff online, or how do they handle probate in this specific area? You need to know what county, especially in the United States, and what state they lived in and where they had property. That's the key. Sometimes they died in an area and they didn't have property there. Well, their probate is going to be handled in the place where they have land. Maybe they were visiting one of their children in Milwaukee, but they owned their land in Outagamie County. Well, that probate process is going to happen in Outagamie County, even though they died in Milwaukee. So of course, where they died is going to be the first place I'm going to look to see if there's a probate record, because I'm thinking, okay, if they lived there or they died there, that might be where the probate is. But like I just mentioned, probate might have happened somewhere else, depending on where they owned land. And we're going to look at land records and how to find land records next month. So if you're not sure where your ancestor owned land, just hold on till next month and we will show you how to find their land records. If they had property in multiple counties or multiple states, that probate process has to occur in all those places. And of course, remember, boundary changes happen. So it might have been Outagamie County at the time your ancestor died, or maybe it was before Outagamie County was formed and it was officially part of Brown County, for example. So you want to go with the county name it was at the time your ancestor died, because that's going to be where the records are held, maybe not what the county is called now if the boundaries have changed. So as we've looked at before in our past sessions, one of the great places to find some of the boundaries and the different changes is going to be through Heritage Quest. So you can access this free from home if you're a Wisconsin resident. If you're not a Wisconsin resident, check with your local library. And then right here, once you click into Heritage Quest, we've got what's called the Census Map Guide. So you can click on each individual state. So say I'm looking in Iowa. I can see what Iowa looks like in 1840, and you can see it's only these black counties that are in black. The ones that are written in white is what it is now. So you can see all of this part of Iowa is not settled in 1840. But if I click on 1870, maybe, now I can see, oh, look at Iowa today is the same as it was in 1870. So I can kind of see the different changes that would have happened. So you can see Humboldt County or Webster County and the different boundary changes that might have happened between 1850 and 1860 and 1870. Of course, this is only going to be the census year, so those every 10 years that the census happens. So of course our ancestors died in between census years. So there's another resource that you can also check called the Map of US. So this is another really great resource where you can look at all the various years and click on the different years to see. So if you come here, mapofus.org, they've got different state maps. So you can click on state maps, scroll down to see the big map, and then click on your state. So maybe we want Illinois this time. And you can see there's an Illinois map with cities and highways and a central guide, or Illinois lakes and rivers, or this is the one I want. So you kind of got to look at what it says and get a little description. So I'm always looking for the interactive history. That's the one I want. So this is of course going to show me what it looks like now, but if I scroll down here, you can see what it looks like in 1790. Then I can click on, oh, maybe my ancestor died in 1809. Well, now I can see what it is in 1809. I can see what it is in 1819, and you can see what the various counties are at the time. It also gives you a little bit of synopsis up here, like, oh, Alexander was created from a non-county area, or Clark was created from Crawford County, et cetera, et cetera. So I can click on some of these other years to see what it was and get a little bit more detail up in here. Does that make sense? And you can do that for any of the states in the United States. Yes. Through this site, I don't think I've ever seen plat maps on here, no. But we will talk a little bit more about plat maps next month. All right, thankfully for us genealogists, many of the wills and probate records have been digitized. Of course, not everything, but we've got some on the main genealogy websites like Ancestry, either the in-library use only one, or the paid personal subscription if you have one. We've also got Family Search, which is available to anybody for free from home, or other sites like sometimes library sites or archive sites or genealogy societies or the Digital Public Library of America. There's a mountain of resources that are available for online genealogy records. So we can't possibly go through all of them today. But again, that Family Search Wiki is going to be where you should start to see what electronic resources are there. So again, if I look up something like Illinois probate records, right here I can see, oh, here's an Illinois wills and probate records from 1772 to 1999 at Ancestry that includes indexes and images. If I see that little $sign, that means you have to have a subscription. Or I can come to the library to try to access that library edition of Ancestry before we close on the 25th. Or I would have to go to one of the other Wisconsin libraries to access it while we're closed. Or I can see there's another one from 1819 to 1988 at Family Search. And just quickly, I want to point out, sometimes these dates are misleading. It doesn't mean it's going to have every single probate record from that time period. It might have a smattering. It's going to be not every single thing, but hopefully you get lucky. And if your ancestor died within that time period, hopefully they'll have their probate record digitized and online. So Family Search Wiki is the first place I'd start for those electronic ones. Thankfully, some of them are indexed online, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes the index might only include the name of that deceased person, not all their heirs that are listed. So if you're looking for the name of their child that's listed in their will, you might not be able to find them by that name search. You might have to look for that deceased person's name. But there's something awesome called artificial intelligence that Family Search has now integrated into their website, specifically for probate records, to make them easier than ever to find them. So that's how I would recommend starting, is going through Family Search. So I'm going to show you quickly how this works. So you would go to familysearch.org. Remember, you need to have a free account here, and you want to be signed into your account. So I'm already signed in since we looked at it earlier. But once you're signed in, there's kind of a secret way where you have to get through this, because it's not available in any of these yet, because it's still kind of in process of being worked on. They just debuted this earlier this year, so it's not integrated into all of their site yet, but thankfully the probate records and land records for the United States, which we'll dive deeper into next month, are available for this full text searching. So what you have to do to get there is scroll down, and there's a spot called Family Search Labs. So right here, you'll see it on the right-hand side. And if you click on View Experiments, because this is an experiment yet, they've got something called Expand Your Search with Full Text. So I've got it turned on. If you haven't used it yet, you might have to click on Try It. But I've got it already turned on, so I can click on Go to Experiment because it's already turned on for me. And then right here, I've got this area where I can put in a specific keyword, a specific name, a specific place, a specific year range, whatever I want to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in my ancestor's name, and I'm going to put it in the keyword search. You can put it in the name search, correct. And I'm going to put it in quotation marks because I want the full text to search Richard Gardebrick together, and not every instance of Richard and every instance of Gardebrick. I'm going to click search. And then magic, I can see there's the computer is reading his name here, and I can click on it and I can see, okay, what is this? So you can see over here, it's giving me like a little text version of what it thinks this page is saying, and it highlights on the page where this person's name is shown. So you can see we're on page 81 of 111. Usually it kind of brings you into a probate record that you might be partway through it. But if I take away this 81 and I just click on 1 and go to the first page, this is actually the first page of his probate packet. So now I can go page to page and see his whole probate packet here. And I can download the images right here with this little button with the arrow. And again, you can see over here, it's got like a little transcription of what it thinks it says. It's not 100% accurate. They're fairly accurate on the names, but like you can see, this is actually a G for Gardebrick, but over here it says J. So that's why it didn't come up in the search, because the computer's just reading it a little bit incorrectly. So I can continue going through all these pages and see some of the things, like here's his will, like I showed you before. And again, it's got this little transcription. And then this is what I was talking about earlier, how you can use this little AI thing that says summarize the document. So if I click on this, it's going to give me a little summary. So it's saying, oh, Richard of Oconto County drafted his last will and testament on October 16th. 1924, leaving all his personal property and real estate to his wife, Mary. After her death, the estate is to be divided among their children, with sons receiving 50% more than daughters. How rude. including Gertrude, wife of John, Esther, wife of Vernon, et cetera, et cetera. And it's appointing this person as executor. So it's kind of giving me a little summary of what this document is saying. So if I'm like, I have no clue what this document is saying, I can click on that little summarize tool and it will say, what in the world is this? So you can say, oh, this is a financial statement from this date detailing an account involving him. And again, you can see the mistranscription of his name. And you can see, oh, it's in a connection with such and such company, et cetera, et cetera. So this is kind of this new wave of technology that's helping us better understand these records and to better be able to find them by just putting in their name. Does anybody have questions about how to use this little AI full text search thing yet? It's so cool. They didn't have this until earlier this year. So I had to find the will the hard way at the archives, but it's still awesome because now I've found many other records and I'll show you how it works with land records next month, but it's really cool. Yes, and it can read the handwriting, which is the best part because a lot of the other stuff that's come to date before this cannot read handwriting. So this is new that it can read handwriting now, which is awesome because so many things are in handwriting, right? And you know, sometimes now the kids aren't even taught handwriting in school. So this is going to help them definitely in the future because I think AI is only going to get better. Let's see what kind of questions and things we've got in here. Let's see. So yeah, it's only certain databases at this point. So just be aware. How much information I know, I will forget. How do you watch the recording? On our YouTube channel? And I will send out an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. So yes, there's only certain databases in this full text search, including probate records and land records. Does this go by the 75-year privacy law or can we see more recent probates? It's going to depend on the laws in the state. So you saw some of these go up to like the 1980s sometimes. So it depends on the law of the state. Can you correct the entries? Let's see. I think if you go to this indexed data, you might be able to edit a little bit. I've not played with it. Yeah, I'm not seeing how to edit it, I guess. Yeah, I know you can download this part of it. Like if I want to download this, I can include the little transcript and then I can include the citation and stuff too. I thought there was a way to edit it. So like it downloads the picture and then the transcription and then the citation and gives me a link to it. You can copy it to the clipboard. I thought there was a way to edit it, but maybe I just don't have permission to do it. I'm not sure. If anybody knows how to edit it, or maybe we can click add. Yeah, it looks like you can add some indexing, but I don't think you can correct what AI has at this point. And I know you can still attach things to trees. Like I could attach this to Richard in the Family Search family tree. Is this for all the state's probate records? Well, you know, only certain ones are going to be on Family Search. Some of them might be on Ancestry as well. So I'll show you Ancestry in just a second. And then of course, there's other places where you might be able to find them. Does probate go with the place of death or place of residence? It depends on where they owned land. That's where probate happens, or where they owned possessions. So if they didn't own land, it might be just where they died. See, would a husband and wife each have their own probate package? Say a wife passed 20 years after the husband and she still had some land when she passed. Possibly, it's going to depend on the probate laws in that state and in that time period when she passed, because sometimes women didn't have as many rights as the men, unfortunately, as we all know that happens to us females. I'm not seeing Family Search Labs on my page. You have to go to the experiments part. So again, once you sign into your Family Search, scroll down and then see the Family Search Labs part here. Click on View Experiments, and then the full text will be an option for you. All right, let's see what else we got here. Any questions by you guys in the stage? Yes, they are in a test stage, so they're adding new stuff all the time. So just because you don't see something on here now doesn't mean it won't be on here in a week or 2 or 3 weeks. I think also here you can see what record sets they have included. So if you scroll down here, they've got a little video tutorial and stuff too. That might tell you how to edit stuff if you do have that ability. And then right here, it shows you what they have in here. So they've got US land and probate records for a certain time period. They've got Mexico notarial records, US plantation records, Australia probates, and New Zealand wills and probates for a certain time period. So check back regularly as new collections will be added, it says. So hopefully this will be something new that they will be able to do with all the different things in Family Search. All right. Again, see that Family Search wiki for specific links to other collections by state or by country. There are also international probate records on Family Search. But except for those US, Australia, and New Zealand ones, they are not part of the full text. So not everything is part of full text. Like for example, if you're looking for Ireland or Germany, that's not part of that magical full texting thing I just showed you. You're gonna have to then go into the Family Search wiki, like we looked at earlier, put Germany probate records, and then you can see the links to those collections. Or go into the catalog in Family Search to see the available collections for that specific location. So here's how you would do that, or how you would find those ones that aren't part of that magical AI stuff. So first, we're going to go under Search and click on Records. So I can, again, under collection title, I can start typing like Germany, probate. And now I can see, oh, here's some Berlin, Germany probate records from certain years. And then I can search within these, for example. So I could click on it, and sometimes it's not indexed at all. So I would have to browse through all these almost 500,000 images possibly. Sometimes they have it nice and kind of broken down, so you can see certain surname letters and numbers of the will. Like if you have some sort of citation from somebody, you might be able to narrow it down that way. Or sometimes they have indexes within here. So it might say like index or something, or you might just need to go through a little bit of records. Sometimes they do have it partially indexed. Like I mentioned, they might have the name of that person who died indexed and not necessarily all the other people named within there. But it's going to vary depending on the location. There's also going to be a spot for more unindexed stuff. So if you click on Search and go to Images, we've looked at this before in some of our past sessions, but this is where you would put in a specific location. So you can put in a specific country, specific state, whatever you want to do. So I could type in, for example, United States, click on Search. Of course, it's going to give me a million results. So I can narrow it down over here by a specific state, for example. And the other thing I want to narrow it down, so it's going to even ask me to select different counties or different cities. There's also this spot called Life Event. So if I click on Life Event, there's one for legal, there's one for marriage, there's one for property, et cetera, divorce, death, all kinds of various things. So you want to select one of these, for example, depending on what you're looking for. So I might select legal, and then it's going to even have various things selected here. So I could uncheck the box, and then I could scroll down here to see, okay, here's ones related to probate. So I'm going to select maybe all the probate ones. And then once I've selected all the probate ones, I want to click Update. And now I can see all the various probate ones. So they might have different dates. Sometimes they might have different names associated with the person it's about. Depends on how indexed or unindexed it is. So you might need to play around with this a little bit and try to get as narrow as possible. This is obviously just a very broad search that I'm giving you as an example to show you. But once you see one that's like, hey, this might be my ancestor, I can click on this. and then be brought into those actual images to then scan through them, save them, do whatever I want. Usually with probate files, you're gonna see something like this, the big case file that's gonna say what case number it is and who the person it is. And then I can again go page to page to then see all the materials that are in this person's probate packet. And then again, I can click on this button right here and it's gonna download a copy of that page for me. Unfortunately, there's no magical way, like earlier we looked at Richard's and his was 111 pages. There's no magical way to download all 111 pages at the same time. You gotta do it one by one. And I hope Family Search will eventually change that because that's a bummer when you have a long probate packet like that and you have to click download on all of them. All right, so that was Family Search and how you can find some really great probate stuff on there. Of course, Family Search is not the only place, but if you have any questions about Family Search before I show you Ancestry, I'm happy to take them. So Ancestry also has some probate records digitized. So again, you can either use our free library edition by coming into the library, or if you have a personal paid subscription, you can also do that at home. How Ancestry does it is they organize all of them by state first. So you want to start with the state where they died, like Wisconsin or Arizona or whatever. They also have some international probate ones, like UK, Australia, Ireland, Scotland. Of course, if you have a paid subscription, you have to have the world subscription in order to access those, or definitely come into the library because we have access to some of those international ones without paying extra. Like I mentioned earlier, when we looked at Family Search, be careful of those database titles because the date range is misleading. The 1788 to 1999 isn't going to include every single probate record from that time period, unfortunately. They might have one 1999 and one 1788, and then most of them are from 1900 to 1910 or something. You just never know. They're constantly adding more records. So definitely it's worth a shot to search and see if they have yours. If they don't have the one that you're looking for, check back later or check offline to see where you might be able to access it if you don't want to wait. Be aware also, even if it's a state collection, not all the counties might be in there. So for example, when I look at all the Wisconsin ones on Ancestry, Oconto County is not on there for some reason. I know they have Oconto County probate records because I found them on Family Search and I found them offline at the UW Green Bay Archives. But for some reason, Ancestry doesn't have it in their Wisconsin probate records collection. So you want to definitely check that and see before I start searching. Well, if all my ancestors died in Oconto County, that's not going to help me if I look on Ancestry. So definitely check in other places or multiple places. Of course, records might have been lost. Maybe there was a courthouse fire. Maybe they're just not digitized yet. So keep checking back or look at other alternatives. I always recommend browsing through the county if after you've tried your name search of your ancestor, you don't get any results. Because like I said, sometimes the indexes aren't complete, or maybe they've just really badly misindexed your ancestor's name. So they could have errors, or maybe you might have your ancestor listed by initials. Like I found one of my ancestors, I know him as Levi Scott. Well, his probate record, it's listed as I.L. Scott. Well, those are initials. So hence why I'm searching Levi and it's not coming up because he has initials instead of his full first name and middle name. So they might have only also indexed the index of the probate records and not all of the actual records. So that's another thing that they sometimes do. Maybe they just have an index of the first, 50 pages where it says, okay, you can find this name on page 426. Well, then you have to go find 426, for example. It's not always in alphabetical order on the indexes. Sometimes that image number is not the same as the image number in the book or online. So you might have to get a little creative in order to find that actual image that you're looking for. So here's just a snapshot of what the library edition looks like. They have about 215 collections that are considered wills, estates, and guardian records. So you can see, of course, they've got some international ones like England, Wales, Canada, different United States, Northern Ireland, Denmark, et cetera, Australia. So again, come into the library before we close on the 25th, or visit one of the other Wisconsin libraries while we are closed to explore these. I'm going to show you the paid version as well. They've got considerably more. I just have the basic United States subscription at this time, but they've got 400 and some collections, including all their international ones that they have on the paid version. But of course, in order to access the international ones, you have to have the world subscription or come into the library and hope that we have it as part of the library subscription. So if you've got that paid version or you're coming into the library, the best spot to find these probate records is going under search and clicking card catalog, because I'm a librarian. This is the way I love to go, is through the card catalog. So right here, I can put in a title or a keyword, or they've also got these filters on the left-hand side. So you'll see one of them says court, land, wills, and finances. So I can click on that to narrow down to just those types of records. And then I can narrow down to the wills, estates, and guardian records. And now I can see all the various different collections. Up here, I can sort a certain way by date added, by the collection name, when it was last updated, or by the record count. So whatever you decide to sort it by, you're welcome to do it however you'd like. And you can kind of skim through these, or if you're like, hey, I really just want a Wisconsin one, I can put it over here in the keywords and click search. So now I can see here's a Wisconsin wills and probates records from 1800 to 1987. Again, with 419,000, they're not going to have every single one from this 187 time period in here. So I can do a name search for my ancestor right here, or over here I can look and see, this is where they list all the different counties. So you can see they don't have all the different counties, like they don't have Adams County, they don't have Oconto County, like I mentioned earlier. Milwaukee, yep, Milwaukee County is there. I can't remember all the counties in Wisconsin, but they're missing a few. But what you can do is you can type in your ancestor's name. I'm just going to put in the last name at this point just to show you how it works. Go ahead and click on search. And now I can see kind of a little snapshot overview of the different names and the probate dates and what county that probate occurs in. The great thing I like about Ancestry is that they then also give you like a little kind of table of contents of these probate records. So I can see cover page, order papers, sales papers, guardianship papers, administration papers. And when I can click on these, it brings me to that exact spot within the probate record without me having to go through, 20 pages or 50 pages to find that specific spot. So now I can see that part of the probate packet. So this, of course, is going to include lots of different files in this one part of the section. So you can use this little film strip down here to kind of hover over them to see when the start of the probate packet is. So again, you always kind of find that little file folder. And now I can click through and save them. Again, you got to save them one by one. So you can go up here and click save to your computer, or save to that person in your tree. And then again, you just kind of click through and see all the various pages of their probate packet here. So yeah, that's how it works on Ancestry. Any questions about using Ancestry?
Mentioned, there might be date restrictions, like how far back.
Yes.
Like this is 1987.
Yeah, so again, it's not going to include everything. It depends on the different states and what they've digitized up to this point. So there's no way to tell until you go and search what's on there and what's not on there.
Oh, so there's no thing that says you can't look. You can only look 70 years further back.
So Wisconsin, there's no restriction that I'm aware of, but of course, not everything's going to be online.
Right, okay.
So even the stuff that lists up until 1987, like I said, there might only be one or two or a handful of ones that are from 1987, and most of them might be from a certain 50-year time period or whatever. We really don't know what's on here until you try to search and see what you can find. But these dates are definitely misleading. All right, so remember, just like everything else, not everything is online, not everything is digitized yet. Just like other record sets, of course, every jurisdiction has its own access restrictions to probate records. So some states might have a 75-year time period or a 50-year time period or a 25-year time period or some other restriction. It's going to depend on the state law at that time and what's available and what's digitized, what's not digitized, what you can have access to and where to access them. Again, if it's not online, I would start with that Family Search Wiki. Go to Wisconsin Probate Record in that Family Search Wiki, see how I can access those Wisconsin probate records and see where they're located, depending on what time period I'm looking at. So they might be at the local courthouse. They might be in an offsite storage somewhere. They might be at an archive or some sort of state archive. They might be with a genealogy society or a historical society or a library. It's going to vary depending on how the states or those counties decide to distribute those historical records. Like I mentioned earlier with Wisconsin, we've got those area research centers throughout the state for those older ones. Sometimes they're on microfilm, sometimes they're the big bound volumes where you can find the wills in there. Sometimes it's those loose probate packets. It really depends on what they've got available, depending on what they've been given from the county. But the more current ones are still going to be at the county courthouses. Do you have a question?
Yeah, and it's vague, just a vague question.
Mhm.
Most of Wisconsin records are from 1850 on. And so, I mean, it wasn't really a state. But if you're researching your genealogy and your lineages, and you're going back in time before that and with other states, do people have a really good prospect of being able to find these, or is almost everything gone?
So before statehood, definitely check. I'm not sure what's available for things pre-statehood. Yeah.
I don't know what to expect because I'm having difficulty finding things, but I thought maybe it's me, you know.
Yeah, I would ask a librarian in that area because they're going to be the most knowledgeable about records that they would have available for those specific time periods that you're looking for, or know what place to send you to. Like for me, if somebody asked, how do I find this pre-statehood stuff? I would say, you're going to want to reach out to the Wisconsin Historical Society because they're going to have the best stuff for that time period for the state. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's worth a shot. I would definitely ask the librarians. The librarians, if they don't know it, they will find somebody who knows it. Yeah. Of course, always call before you make a trip to research somewhere to make sure they have the stuff and that they have it available to you. Maybe it's in an offsite storage, so there might be a time period where they got to go grab it for you before you show up. Or you just want to verify that they're going to be open on the day that you plan to go there. Because if you drive 2 hours, you definitely want to make sure it's worth your trip. And sometimes it's really awesome, especially at the area research centers, they're even pull those files. If you say, hey, I'm looking for this specific file, or, oh, I want to come and research all these Oconto County probates, they're going to have all the indexes and all the records ready and waiting for you to go because they know you're coming. So it helps cut down on some time for you. Some of the sites even have online indexes for the records. So for example, UW Oshkosh is one of our area research centers. So you can look at that index before you go and grab the information that you're going to need in order to better look at that record. So for example, you can come to their site, click on this genealogy area, and now I can see they've got a listing for civil and probate court records. I can see what local holdings they have. So it gives me like a little snapshot of what they've got for records. Like if I'm looking for civil case files for Green Lake County, they don't got them at Oshkosh for some reason. Or if I'm looking for something after 1978 for this, I know I need to contact the courthouse. So it kind of gives me like a little cheat sheet right here on how what they've got available for me or where I need to go. They've also got this area where I can search for and order copies of indexed cases. So I can do that. I can just pop in a name here and click search and see what they've got in their index. So I can see there's a bunch of different cases here. I can even narrow it down here on the left-hand side to just probate ones if I want to look at the probate ones. And then I can see, you know, a little snapshot of what county it is, possibly what date it is. If I click on the little arrow, it's going to give me a little bit more information, like what real number or case number or series, all the stuff that I might need if I'm going to go research on site. Or I can just add this record to my cart, like if I don't live in the area or can't easily go there, go to the checkout and see, oh, it's only 10 bucks. Super easy if I don't live in the area. You know, obviously different repositories charge different things, but for me, that might be worth it and save me a trip to Oshkosh if I want to just pay that $10 and get it. If you can't research in person, like I just showed you, some will also send you copies of the files if you request them, but there's of course usually a cost. Sometimes it's just the cost of copies. Sometimes they're charging an hourly research fee or a flat research fee. It really just depends on the different repositories. But for example, like I have a lot of ancestors in Jasper County, Iowa. Well, that's, you know, quite a drive for me to go research there. I've been there once. Would love to go back again, but in the meantime, maybe I'm going to reach out to that genealogical society. They've got a great service where they will snail mail you copies of different probate records, cheaper than it's going to, you know, be for me to take the time off work, drive there, get a hotel for the night, and go research myself. So, you know, you got to look at your budget and what your individual circumstances are and what's available to you if you can't go there and research in person. There's also a great site called the Ancestor Hunt, which has some links to different probates and wills that are digitized online. So it's going to link you to, of course, the ancestry ones, the family search ones, and some other ones. So it's just the ancestorhunt.com. If you go up here to resources, they've got a bunch of different things other than probate records, of course. They've got some little pop-up things that happen because, of course, it's a free site. But if I scroll down here, I can see there's a probates and wills section. They've got a couple little videos and things I might read or watch to learn a little bit more. They've got different links here for me to use. And then of course they've got all the individual states. So if I'm researching in Illinois, possibly, I'm going to click on Illinois. And then see all the various links. Once I scroll down, they've got different ones for the different counties. And so you can just click on that link, for example, to be brought into wherever it is. So this one's linking me to what's available on Family Search for that different area. So I can explore all these links that they have digitized things available. And again, this is for every state in the United States. So you can see every single state is listed here. Only the United States at this point. Some of the other collections they have, like newspaper ones, or some international ones as well. But for probates and wills, they just have the states here. And then like we saw earlier in the probate package, you see those newspaper notices. So that might also clue you into a time period or a probate case exists for your ancestor. So of course they have to publish those notices in the newspapers to let those creditors and debtors know, or let the people know, hey, we're gonna, you know, try this probate case. So you might find little newspaper articles listing more information, like the cases heard within the probate court that date or that are upcoming. So of course, check all the main newspaper sites, refer back to our newspaper talk that we did earlier this year, where I talked a lot more in depth about all of these sites and how to research in them. Of course, we've got the video up on YouTube if you want to rewatch that to refamiliarize yourself with how to use all these newspaper sites. But some examples might be like this, where this is the notice to approve the will and notice to creditors, where it's saying, you know, this is the estate of that specific person. This is when we're going to hear this case. So now I know I need to look in the county court for Outagamie County for this specific time period. And now I can see where her probate packet is then. And again, you'll likely see copies of things like these in the probate file. But if you're kind of going the opposite way and finding the newspaper thing first and then finding the probate, this is an easy way to do it. You might also find something like this. This is just like a general article that you're not going to find within the probate packet. because it's listing multiple cases that are happening. So you'll see, oh, there's something about the guardianship of so-and-so. There's something about the estate of this person, or the estate of that person, or the guardianship of that person. So there's like listing 5 or 6 different cases for the specific time period. So now I know, hey, this is when this court case is happening, and now I can go back in the court records during that time period and see if I'm able to find this court case. I also have a great book that I have through the library system called Courthouse Research for Family Historians that I definitely recommend you check out. They've got 3 whole chapters on estates and probate where you can learn a lot more about how to research in these if you want to dive a little bit deeper into more than what we can cover in this 2 hours. Of course, our next session is our last one of the year. On Tuesday, November 26th, we're going to talk all about land records. For right now, our plan for next year is going to be doing these sessions in the renovated library when we reopen, when we have a time period. I'm fingers crossed that we'll be open for the January session, but we don't know at this point. So I might still be here at Thompson Center in January. We'll have to see. For those who have kind of done this the last year, we are going to restart the series in January, but I'm going to revise it a little bit. I'm going to add some new sessions that you guys haven't had yet. Like I'm going to do a whole one on family search, a whole one on ancestry. I'm still kind of finalizing the details of what each month is going to include. So feel free to attend again next year. We're also planning on having I'll be in the library, but if you don't want to join me in the library, you can be here at Thompson Center as well and watch me on the screen. And I'm going to have a volunteer here who will help you answer or ask the questions of me at the library. We're still also going to have the virtual component as well. So hopefully more details I will have in November when we have our last session here. In the meantime, we've got our Find Your Ancestors session. The November session is all about using Social Security records on November 9th. And then our December session, we're still going to have a December Find Your Ancestors just on Zoom. It's going to be all about researching your ancestors' medical history. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, definitely sign up for that class as well. That's what I've got for you guys. So thanks for holding in here, and I'm happy to answer any more questions you've got. Someone said, email research plan to a repository. They often respond with useful suggestions. So that's great. Someone says, definitely recommend calling the Oshkosh Research Center first because sometimes they're not always open. So that's a great thing. Any other questions here? I don't see anything in the Q&A. All right, everyone. All right, we'll see you next month then. Take care.